sometimes just knowing people has been enough to incarcerate children for decades. This is one of the biggest injustices that's happening at the moment.
It's time to do something different. And the different is investing in communities, investing in people, investing in relationships. But this is long, deep work.
Young people don't even have a chance to get it wrong, because when they do get it wrong, there's always a statutory organisation or someone ready to pull them up and make massive consequences out of something that they could potentially grow from. Unpacked. Young People and Violence with me, Richie Brave. So after 4 episodes unpacking where youth violence comes from, this final episode is about what comes next. I mean, we've identified lots of different things that feed into the issue, but actually, how do we solve the issue and what do we need to be thinking about collectively? Welcome to Unpacked, Young People and Violence with me, Richie Brave. Across the series, we've challenged narratives that to be young, black and British, often for some people, means that you're dangerous. What has become clear is the systems that are supposed to keep young people safe are often harming them. So what does safety actually look like? How do we build it? What should we be doing? How do we understand it? To help me answer and unpack these important questions, I've got my wonderful guests. So welcome to the table, Shabna Begum, CEO of the Runnymede Trust, the racial justice think tank that commissioned this series. Welcome, Shabna.
Hi.
And Temi Mwale, an organiser, community builder and systems thinker focused on community healing and transformative justice. She's the founder of Forefront and the architect of Harm to Healing, an ecosystem building community power to create systems of healing, safety and justice. Now, today we're talking about solutions. That is the focus, but not the surface level ones. We're talking about systems, power and the importance of change. Welcome both.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
What does safety actually mean? When we're talking about safety, when we're talking about the safety of communities and young people, what does that actually look like? Temi, I'll start with you.
I think it's a really important question, and I wish more people spent time asking it and thinking about it. And I think part of the problem we're trying to address with young people being unsafe is that no one's actually asking what safety would look like for young people. It's about us using our imagination, but it's really basic. At the end of the day, we don't want young people to come to any harm. Safety is freedom from harm. It's also the freedom to be able to build their lives, to be able to have dreams, to be able to imagine their futures, but stressing the not coming to harm part, because the systems that we have at the moment that are supposedly about keeping young people safe actually inflict harm on young people directly themselves. And I find it really challenging when we're dealing with these systems, almost like the gaslighting that happens as if these systems don't create harm for young people directly. That is part of the harm communities are trying to address, not just the kind of community violence that young people might face, but also violence from the systems themselves.
Do you think young people get enough say in the process?
I don't think young people are really asked what safety would look like for them, what would keep them safe. And if we take things like knives, for example, so much of the conversation that has happened around so-called knife crime has not even asked young people why people feel unsafe such that they would carry a weapon, for example. And there are ways for us to talk with young people about safety that are really encouraging for them to reflect on what they need and to center their needs as well, and to really listen about the things that they say don't make them feel safe and to take that seriously.
Shabna, I wanted to bring you in here. I mean, you know, this series was commissioned by the Runnymede Trust, but I wanted to bring in a definition, right? So, because for a long time it was defined in a very specific way, and I've got a definition here, and Temi, later on I'd be interested to hear your perspective. More police, more powers, more punishment. That's often what you see in society, that's what you hear politically. But from what I've heard and learned from my guests, that doesn't seem like safety, right?
Right, I think that's so true. And just coming back to what Temi said as well, I think there's a real kind of sonic quality that we should kind of think about. Like, what's loud is exactly that kind of thing of more police, more powers, more searching, more, you know, everything that's in that kind of punitive architecture of the state wanting to control us. What's silent is this understanding of what keeps us safe, what are young people feeling, what are they how are they experiencing the streets and their communities. And I think that there's a loudness and there's a silence, and that's totally controlled, right? And so from my perspective as well, coming back to that question of safety, if we think about safety at a really kind of genuine level, we often think about safety in that moment of violence, in that moment which is loud, visible, and you have this spectacular amount of attention on it. But actually, what is safety is the conditions, exactly as you described, Temi, the conditions that we have that help to create us in a way where we feel like the society around us wants us to grow, will give us opportunities, will allow us to thrive, to kind of develop our creative and intellectual ambitions and desires, right? To explore all of that. And we don't have that. We don't have that conversation at all. What we have instead is this conversation which is rooted in this idea that more policing, and it's totally kind of tone deaf to the fact that we've had decades of research, reforms, attempts to try and reform the police and find ways of making the police work better for communities. And it's not worked. The evidence does not tell us that more policing produces safer communities. It doesn't tell us that both at a London level, at a UK level, or globally. And we know that. And despite knowing that, and despite the evidence, we operate with this kind of political narrative, which is convenient for some classes and some groups, and allows us to keep going down this same direction of we want more police.
So Shabna, what's the disconnect? I mean, evidence has proved, it says here when you ask young people what keeps them safe, they don't say policing, they say stable housing, youth services, mental health support. In other words, things that prevent harm from happening, like you said. Why do you think when people think about safety, the first thing they go to is policing when you're saying evidence doesn't prove this?
Yeah, and I think there's a real mismatch in society currently between what's evidenced and objective and factual versus the narratives and the cultural and the perceptions about what kind of is right. And the report that we did recently at the Runnymede Trust proved this. It spoke to the fact that we are taught that that policing is what we need and want more of. And so if you get more investment in police, we'll be safer. And so people subscribe to that, right? Like if that's all you're taught is that more policing equals less harm, then at some level, people subscribe to that and then politicians go along with that. It's this really vicious cycle of being trapped in this completely nonsensical kind of political conversation, which is completely divorced from the facts, completely divorced from the evidence. And so that report, what we did was we kind of dug beneath the polling. You ask people if they want more policing, will that make them feel safe? At some level, lots of people say yes. But if you then interrogate that and say to people, actually, what do you want? Would you want more police or would you want more counsellors in your schools? And people will always opt for that across groups, right? Across kind of, whether it's Black, Asian, white communities, they would always ask for more investment in schools or school counsellors or youth services. So before I came to the Runnymede Trust, I was a teacher for 23 years in a school in Hackney. And right at the very beginning of my teaching career, my classroom used to back onto like the gym. And so I had an entrance where the kids used to come in during the day. And then at the end of the day, I was one of those teachers that would stay for ages after school. The back of my classroom would be opened up and then you'd have the youth centre that was operating in the gym. And you had loads of kids who would come there. There were music sessions. There were just like sports activities, so much that went on in the school and beyond the school. And you saw a different side to these kids. And we don't have that anymore. All of that has been stripped away. And we don't talk about that because we're constantly in this conversation about police.
What strikes me about what you're saying, Shabna, is, safety is less about control, but more about meeting the needs of young people and how we meet those needs. I mean, Temi, you've worked with young people for a really long time. When safety is positioned as policing, what ends up getting missed?
I think one glaringly obvious thing is that it doesn't match with young people's experience in terms of in the situations where they actually feel unsafe, whether there is a conflict, whether there is threat, and the fears that they have about their own safety, they aren't able to call the police. It sounds like such a basic thing, but I want to stress it because who are they supposed to call?
Why do they feel like they can't call the police?
They are never going to call the police because their own experiences, the experience of their friend, the experience of their community, our intergenerational, historical relationship, especially of the Black community, but other racialized, minoritized communities as well with the police, it's just not even on the cards. It's not even a possibility. So from the point of reality, if young people aren't going to call the police, then what should we put in place if we really want to keep young people safe? What things should we put in place so that there are people that they can call? Who? Whether that's youth workers, whether that's community supports, it could be therapists, it could be others, but it's all relational. Police are often coming after the fact anyway. So it is worth us taking it back and using our imagination and say, if we had to design from scratch something that keeps young people safe, let's look at all the touchstones. Let's look at the whole timeline of how conflicts and harm can evolve and develop over time. Where are the opportunities? Who could they have spoken to and at what points? And who could have intervened and supported? And we were trying these things in practice at Forefront for years in our community. And I feel really proud to say we were people that could be called in the middle and have stopped live conflicts, have de-escalated situations, both violent events in the moment that are happening, but also building conflicts and tensions that are happening in the community that need to be intervened in. And you have to have relationships with people to be able to do that. But there also has to be trust to be able to do that. And what's the intention? The intention is to make sure there's as least harm as possible and people can be safe. So I think there is an opportunity if we start from scratch in some ways. And it is about the skills. We can teach young people more skills around how to navigate also, so conflicts don't escalate. That's also part of the work that needs to happen. But it's having safe, trusted people and real community bonds so that there's that knowledge and relationship within communities that exist to navigate these situations. There are many amazing youth organisations that are really intervening in harm day to day in many communities across the country. The work largely goes unseen and it's not really invested to any of the scale, like you just shared, that the main systems that are supposedly about protecting and safety, the level of investment, I think the Met Police gets a few billion each year.
That's a lot of that's a lot of money. You know?
And I think just speaking to what you were saying there's like so many layers to this, right? So there's that community solidarity piece. What enables communities to work together, right? And to have the right level of infrastructure and to be able to have the spaces that they can come together and connect, right? And so seeing that actively kind of stripped away. So it's not just that actually it's kind of accidentally been lost. We have seen policies, both economic and political, by successive governments actively strip that away from communities. And then you're also having the relationships that you described as well, Temi, about how do you build relationships between different generations and across communities if you don't have those spaces, right? When I had my first daughter, it was pre-austerity, and there was a Sure Start Centre at the bottom of my kind of, I live in East London, and that was a space where like you had different classes of people all meeting. It had children's services. By the time my son was born, a couple of years later, that was gone from the community. So all of those young mums, all of the mums in that community, there was no connection for them. You could pay to go to your yoga, baby, massage, all those kinds of stuff if you're kind of a middle class and you've mum and you're able to pay for those services. But that space as a community space that had different communities, whether we're talking about racial or cross-class lines, that was completely gone. That's a political and economic decision that's made. And what you do is you deprive communities of the spaces and the relationships that they need to be able to genuinely kind of build community safety and to stop harm.
We talk a lot about community, but I feel like often there is this fear that's driven up in community of young people. Young people are perceived in a particular way. What frustrates me a lot is young people are spoken about in a really negative way. And again, quotes here, we need more police, we need more stop and search, we need more control. And I think often that comes from a sense of fear.
You've said fear about young people, but like it goes without saying, especially in this context, it's deeply racialized, right? Like we know that black boys, if they're in a group together, they are treated, just their kind of visibility, their kind of loudness appears in a different way to if it was a same group of kids, same size group of kids, and it was white kids. It's really worth thinking about how people show up is completely racialized, right? And for me, if I go on public transport, that's see it, say it, sorted. means something entirely different. I know who it's targeted at. I know that if you're a brown Muslim man who happens to have a big bag on you, everyone's eyes are going to flit to that person, right? So again, like all of this shows up in different ways depending on kind of the context, but also the racialized identity of those young people.
And that has an impact on the way that these young people are treated. When I think about the way serious youth violence is presented, and it's like these children, you never know what they're doing. Everyone's very suspicious of them. What does that then do to the way that they're policed? If they're positioned in a particular way, if they're presented as dangerous, if they're presented as scary, I wonder what that does to the ways in which they're policed and managed by the police, statutory organisations, community, people who live alongside them. I mean, Temi, I can see you wanting to say something there.
It's dehumanising. They aren't treated as human beings with emotions, with feelings, with fears. They're not seen with their vulnerabilities. They're not offered support. They're not seen in the way that they can be victimised. They're not seen as survivors, many of them, of harm and all the things that comes with being a survivor. It is really so heartbreaking to me because they are such beautiful beings. Spending time with young people, letting them express themselves, letting them open up, seeing them coming to grips with like their emotions and their dreams. And it is heartbreaking to me because I'm like, I don't really understand how anyone could see you differently than this. And yet these narratives and stereotypes that do dehumanize them, it alienates them, it pushes them away, and it makes them feel really isolated. And so a lot of the privilege that I've had to be in a supportive relationship with young people and to facilitate those relationships with other young people in my team at Forefront as well, it just felt like that, like an actual honor and privilege, but so disappointing to hear them say like, I've never been able to say this before. There's no one else I could tell this thing. And it's like, why? There should be so much more support, and that shutting down of like the communication because people are fearful. I'm like, this is he's 14. What do you think?
Just a baby.
He's like so young. And so much of the time that is driving it. They don't even get the opportunity to explore their identity, who they might want to become. They're still growing and being shaped, but I want it to be very clear to people that labeling, that narrative, the stereotypes and that treatment that comes from feeling that you should fear them or see them as a threat, it's not neutral. They experience that, and the way that they experience it shapes who they feel, how they feel in society, how they move through the world and how they navigate the world, and their feelings of isolation, which drive a lot of loneliness, a lot of mental health challenges. And it is just, it doesn't have to be that way at all.
As someone who still works with children myself, I relate to what you're saying. It even makes me a bit emotional to hear you speaking about them in that way, because I don't think people often humanize them and the realities of them. And I think what strikes me about what you're saying, Temi, is, we all have a collective responsibility to talk about young people in a very different way. For me, listening to what was said in the previous episodes of the podcast and listening to you both now, there's a worry that young people don't even have a chance to get it wrong, because when they do get it wrong, there's always a statutory organisation or someone ready to pull them up and make massive consequences out of something that they could potentially grow from.
I really want to speak to that because I think something really insidious that's happening in this country at the moment through the joint enterprise and conspiracy laws is just that young people who may have gone to a fight after school, for example, in their school uniforms. And this is something that has been happening for generations. Young people get into fights. Sometimes it's not such a serious thing. However, in this day and age, people are coming to harm and some young people are losing their lives. But I find it really challenging that in those types of circumstances, what would have been seen as normal kind of school behavior, that yes, mistakes can be made, people should learn and grow from. But I think if you asked any adult, they would probably say they got into a fight or two or saw a fight
probably about
at school.
20 when I was young.
But did those lead to the consequence of going to prison for your whole life for being there? I think many people across the country would be shocked to know that there are young people who are going to spend their significant time, 20, 30 years in prison as a result of just being there. And sometimes not even being there. Sometimes just text messages, sometimes just knowing people has been enough to incarcerate children for decades. And this is one of the biggest injustices that's happening at the moment. But it really, like, to me, brings home what you just shared, that it's like young people today, and especially young Black people, there's no mistake. You can't make any mistake. You can't put a foot out of, like, you can't do anything wrong. And even when you don't do anything wrong, you can still come to significant harm and have really serious consequences that are going to impact your whole life. That type of collective punishment is reserved for some young people, not for all young people. And also, a big part of safety is about accountability. We're living in a culture that isn't really about repair or accountability. And we actually do deserve a system that holds people accountable.
What I'm hearing from you is the impact of policing and the impact of these structures that exist around young people. How do we bring people along who think safety is only equal to policing?
This is really important for us because part of what we're trying to say within this is, like, we need our imagination. We need to really go back to basics and ask what safety looks like. And for communities who have been most impacted also by criminalization, by racialized criminalization, to redefine it and be able to put forward a vision for the future so that we can help people understand, well, here's what it could look like. These are the kind of things we could have. It doesn't have to be this way. And show them with real examples. One example, mental health. We could easily just have another number to call, or you call 999 and there's just police, fire, ambulance, mental health response. It could just be another service. Like, the police don't even want to deal with mental health crisis, first of all. So this is an area where we actually might all be in agreement that we could just do something different. And I could say, police responding to mental health crisis, you can look at the evidence. It doesn't keep people safe. They're not trained to do it. They don't want to do it because they know that they're not even de-escalating situations. Many people have come to harm. Many people have even lost their life in calling the police for family members that needed mental health support, for example. And we could just have an alternative. So it's about imagining what other things could exist.
That hits home. My sister had a mental health crisis and ended up in front of the courts as a result. And, you know, that's something that I've seen firsthand inside my own family. God rest her soul. She's passed away now. But,
so sorry.
You know, there was a lot of things that led to her passing away. And I think that experience was probably one of those things, to be honest. So I can attest to what you're saying. Based on what Temi's saying, Shabna, I mean, Temi speaks of resources, right? And the Runnymede Trust has a wealth of experience when it comes to the importance of redirecting resources. What does the evidence say?
Our imagination is so constrained and kind of we are starved of the ability to imagine because we are programmed to think, whether it's kind of the cultural or the media or the kind of political environment, every facet tells us it's police or anarchy and carnage. And so we're programmed to think that. And therefore the kind of the cultivation of our imagination through the examples, and that's the other thing, it's not imagination in the abstract actually, because there are so many examples, and that's the work that we've done recently, is there are so many examples of place-based, community-based projects, people who are working in their communities who are doing this work already. And what is missing is the political will, right? So actually what you need is to have the political will and the political courage to kind of stop with the same old and actually say, do you know what? We know this doesn't work. This might be exactly what everyone wants to hear because it's kind of repetitive and comforting at some level, that like we'll put more money in police, you'll feel more safe, even though that doesn't kind of actually really produce anything. It requires a lot of courage and confidence to say, we're going to stop banging that drum and actually look at what works, and to then put investment into that. That takes people who are committed to see things happen in the long term. There's a political shift that needs to happen. And then we need to see people being patient. We all need to be patient because these are not the solutions that deliver kind of results straight away. But then none of the solutions that we've been offered thus far have offered us solutions, right? None of those things have made us safe. So I think we need like to generate enough momentum and energy for us to say, do you know what? It's time to do something different. And the different is investing in communities, investing in people, investing in relationships. But this is long, deep work. And I think education, we've talked about schools, right? And young people in schools. And some of the most direct harm happens in schools, right? So schools are not neutral places where we've had police officers brought into schools. Like I went from from not seeing police officers to police officers being just at the kind of reception when I was teaching in Hackney. Police officers were part of the reception.
Which feels so strange.
Yeah, right? So you had police officers dressed in their police uniforms, slightly kind of like with a neon whatever vest on as well to make them a little bit more less intimidating apparently. But it was just part of the furniture, and we've become so used to and normalised by of seeing these kind of things. Why on earth would I want a police officer in my school? No, I want someone who's trained in mental health support, in counselling services. Those are the kinds of things that we want to see.
Shabna, I'm really glad that you spoke about education. And people often talk about racism being baked into this system. When we talk about the way young people are perceived, that perception, of course, is going to filter into the schooling system. If it exists in society, it's going to exist in the system because those people also work in the system. I mean, one of our guests from episode 4, Ife Thompson, founder and director of BLAM UK, which stands for Black Learning, Achievement and Mental Health, who do a lot of work in schools, spoke a little about this. And I just want to play you a clip so we can discuss it.
We do a lot of work challenging racist school exclusions because we find that school exclusions disproportionately target Black Caribbean children in particular. And we often find like it's the way in which Black children are perceived and what they do is perceived. So we find like we have like high levels of exclusion for like Black girls kissing their teeth. And like that's a form of cultural expression that's used to Black.
I saw people react to it.
Yeah. So you're seeing like Black ways of like expressing yourself is penalised in a different way. Or we had a young Black child who they said that they thought that she had weed on her, but it was actually a roll-up that someone had given to her that had some cannabis in it. And what the school did, they stripped her to her bra. The teachers did that. Yeah. And
how humiliating. I mean, we've touched on humiliation there. We've touched on misconceptions, but we've also touched on, I mean, you know, looking back here at what Ife said, your identity, the ways in which you know, your cultural expressions can lead you to being excluded from school. Tell me, how do we change this? Is it radical solutions for our education system?
Everything needs to change.
I saw you react to it.
I reacted, especially around the kissing of the teeth, because it's just like, I even rolled my eyes. It reminds me that the people, yes, that are working in our education system, these are not neutral. These are human beings that also have their own upbringings. They had their own histories. Things were taught to them. And it's like, if no one's ever really been taught about British history in a way that helps people to understand empire, how we all even came to be here, different roles that people played and how we got to be in this kind of situation, it's like, this space that's responsible for educating our whole population is just completely not up to the task. There's nothing in the training that's around that. So we could change the curriculum. I'm concerned about who would be teaching it and how would it be taught. And we've also seen that where there are even optional modules, you know, schools get a chance to pick which ones. And a lot of the time, teachers have said they don't even feel comfortable to talk about different aspects of history.
We didn't have enough time in my school to talk about Black history, apparently.
I mean,
there was not enough time to put that in the curriculum, is what we were told as kids.
Schools have to change. And something that you said that I found really actually inspiring and it gave me hope, although it was a difficult, challenging thing you were talking about, was like, well, when a few years ago, there weren't all these police in schools and you could see the shift. But why it gave me hope is because people seen them as part of the furniture, for example. But no, this is just a change that happened. And a new change can happen. And in 15 years from now, people won't even remember that there was ever a time that police were in the schools, for example. And I think with things like the curriculum or with the way, it's possible. It's all possible. So I agree completely. You spoke about the political will in terms of society at large, but within the education system, I don't feel there is enough will for these spaces to be transformed and changed. So we have to work with the agents to know, you know, they are change agents, teachers, head teachers.
From my perspective, there's a collective betrayal, right, of children, young people. And all of us at some level, like as adults, are complicit in it, we may choose to reject it and to be part of the push and the wider movement to reject it. But we are all of us strapped into this society and the infrastructures. So coming back to that kind of education piece, It's totally about the marketisation. For me, the marketisation of education means that there is no incentive for teachers to look at children's well-being and to really think about children as whole young people, right? Like, again, so I taught long enough to watch from know my students as human beings to them literally being colours on a spreadsheet. They were literally red, amber, green on a spreadsheet. And if they were reds, then they were cause of concern to the school. If they were green, that was they were doing all right in terms of their kind of data tracking. And that is it. That is exactly how students are measured. So the systems in the school are set up to dehumanise all children and young people. And then it impacts certain groups more than others, right? So there is a kind of a whole systems piece around schools. There's a curriculum piece. There's a teacher literacy piece, because actually, whether they're doing Black History Month or not in school, there's also the other thing of, are teachers even equipped to be able to deliver kind of Black history in a way that is really genuinely understanding? No, not if they've been brought up in this system themselves as well, right? So there's so many layers to that. But coming back to your original question, Richie, I think there's a really important thing here, that we shouldn't accept the terms of reference of this conversation, because we are told that our solutions are wild and it's kind of radical. And we often use that word radical about the way in which we want to approach these social problems. But they're not radical solutions. They are actually embedded in what we know to be true. And what is radical or wild is the fact that we keep doing the same thing that we know doesn't work, and put money in it and harm people.
Yeah.
That is radical, in my view, in a way that is wild and totally incomprehensible, and should be something that more of us kind of outraged by. Our money is being used, and we are, all of us, being asked to engage in a system that harms children and young people, and thereby harms all of us, right? Yeah. I think we should need to kind of flip the whole conversation. No, you're wild. Your suggestions don't work. They don't work. So I think there's something about us challenging the narrative at a really kind of basic level, and to refuse to be told that we are the ones who've got solutions that just don't work.
Do you know what's funny about it? When we have the conversation about like investment in particular, it always makes me laugh that if it was a business, for example, and it was talking about actual investment and it failed.
Your KPIs, yeah.
I'm like, okay, let's look at your metrics. I don't think it should be deduced to that, but I'm like, if we do just look at what is the benefit, what's the return on the investment? What do we get for this money that gets invested in, for example, policing? Does it achieve its set goals? What are the outcomes? How much is it worth? And I'm like, when you're failing on every metric, to keep pumping huge, vast amounts of resource into a system that has repeatedly failed, then the irony for others that are building other solutions to be said, actually, we don't know if we can trust these solutions. I'm like, we can't trust what's being funded. It's being funded to the tune of billions and failing. We have scraps in comparison, and yet are achieving some incredible results. So if we were funded to a tune of billions, it would not look anywhere like that. So the level of investment, and what we're saying at Harm to Healing in particular, is like, let's match it. Invest the same amount in our healing as is currently invested in harm, and we'll see.
What would you say should replace these systems to help keep young people safe? And I guess, that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, to achieve their best possible self, what should we be replacing things that aren't working for young people with?
You just mentioned the hierarchy of needs, and it's, I think, really important that you did that, because so much of young people and families, just communities' basic needs are just not met in our society today.
Housing, food, water.
And that is part of it. I mean, we can't talk about safety when people can't eat. They don't have anywhere to sleep at night. I think the security and stability is just not there. That makes people unsafe. The idea that like poverty is absent from the conversation around safety, when this type of, economic inequality really is driving so much of what keeps people unsafe.
You can't police your way out of poverty. That is a direct quote from the Runnymede Trust.
And yet, in communities like mine, like Graham Park Estate, for example, there are food banks. There are queues for people to get food, and there are police. That's what's there. That's what is available. And it just makes me think it doesn't have to be this way. Many of us, I'm even young, but also can remember time before food banks being the norm and seeing the growth of that. I'm like, this is modern day Britain. Why? at a basic level, can we just get people on board with the idea that this doesn't work and let's come together collectively and use our imagination and trial things. And a really important thing for me is this concept of fractals. The idea that like what we're going to practice at the small scale is what we're going to be able to grow to the large scale. So when we're talking about big systems that need to change, I want everyday people to feel empowered that there is a role for everyone to play. There's something you can do directly in your life, whether that's around how you relate to people in your relationships, how you support local young people, just conversing with them, disrupting some of the stereotypes, those narratives, taking an active role in wanting to be increasing people's sense of safety. Be more connected to your neighbors. There are just basic things we can do to increase the connection between us. And connection, relationships, it sounds simple, but these are some really basic things that help keep people safe.
Shabna, what are your thoughts?
I get why it can feel so big and overwhelming, because where do you start? But you start with the kind of work that you've just described. But there's also kind of like, from the Runnymede Trust perspective, we work on that big macro piece, right? What's the policy environment? What's the legal environment that enables these things to work or not? So what's the economic environment? Those, you've got to have those three, the political, legal and the economic environment. And so currently, all of that infrastructure is not set up with any of this in mind, right? It is all about the punitive policing approach. We definitely don't consider our work to be the only place that you make change, but we think it's really, really important that you have organisations that work at different levels of the system, and that actually we see our places. We don't try and pretend we're a grassroots community organisation. We're teeny tiny, and we try and kind of cover the whole kind of the UK in terms of education, housing, you name it. We kind of have worked on it and done research on it. But what we do see is that if the legal and the kind of policy environment are not conducive to the kind of work that we want to do, then you're always going to reach a ceiling that like each of the different community groups and the work that they're doing, they will hit an obstacle. So from our perspective, we're trying to remove those obstacles. We're trying to change the policy landscape, the legal landscape, and enable the kind of work that Temi and lots of other organisations already doing to be able to remove those ceilings. It's hard work though, right? Because as you say, people aren't on board, and it's conversations like this that enable us to go out and speak to people and say, like, actually, what does your gut tell you? And most people's gut tells them that the conversation we're having is the right one. And then you begin to think about, what I'm hearing on the news and what X, Y, and Z are saying, that doesn't actually chime with my experience. But I think we need to kind of give people confidence and reassurance that they're not crazy. Right?
I don't want to do a disservice to it as well, because I also think like a lot of people are on board. A lot of people are desperate for
Give
change.
Me something, please.
Anything other than this. And it's like, it's about how we can better mobilize. But I agree, we have to like look at the whole landscape. And in the country, there are definitely some groups that are very much tied to the way things are, and they benefit in some ways from the status quo and are not negatively harmed by some of the things that are happening under these systems that we've been speaking about today. But other groups that have been impacted are desperate for alternatives and also have a lot of ideas, have a lot of creativity and have a lot of visions. And I think with that, it's about building our power and relationships between us so that we can build more collectively and not things happening like in silos or in isolation. So that's really important.
I think what turns a lot of people off of this conversation, it's important for us to address it, I think, is, we spoke about fear, the culture of fear. Someone listens to a conversation like this and they say, well, if someone breaks into my house tomorrow and takes something and harms me, then what do I do?
I don't think, and certainly the Runnymede Trust aren't saying that you don't need some basic level of kind of emergency response to a situation. I don't think we're saying that you totally take away kind of the police. What we are saying though is that, why do people break into homes? Why do people shoplift? Why do people do those things in the first place? If you address those conditions, and they're usually social material conditions that you can address in the long term, then you wouldn't be dealing with that emergency in the first place, or you would reduce the number of emergencies that you're dealing with. I think I accept that at some basic level, there's got to be some emergency response service. But I think that currently we kind of have this really kind of enormous inflated, like you said, police service, which actually is dealing with all sorts of things which are absolutely not and should not be within their remit.
Let me ask another question also. It's like, someone broke into a house and you called the police, and then what happened? The police didn't stop the person breaking into your house. They don't recover the things that have been stolen. the police oftentimes, when they are called, are coming after the fact, after violence has happened, after, other kind of harms have happened. So it's important to be clear about what kind of support and response people want. Oftentimes, when police are called after people have been harmed in some other ways, there actually isn't support for those people. A lot of the system that we have is not about survivors of harm. It's not about what they need. In fact, it's really about how can we get the most punishment, but also there's nothing to address the support needs of the people that have been harmed. So if you've been a victim of violence, for example, there's very, very little support for you.
It satisfies societal need for punishment and retribution and somebody's head on a stick. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't deal with the harm, doesn't deal with the aftermath, doesn't deal with the community impact. It's a great headline on the news. This person's been caught and charged, etc. But the harm that exists under this, no one's fixing the community, no one's fixing the hurt, no one's supporting the victim.
It hasn't addressed the fact that, your house has still been robbed, right, or burgled or whatever. And what's happened to that? That harm still has been perpetrated. Usually no one's been caught, again, speaking to the kind of the failures of kind of police even on their own terms. And the victim is still the victim, right? The person is left with the harm that has been perpetrated against them. So I think that our conversation with policymakers is obviously a really tough one. We're working in a climate where any kind of progressive solution to some of our social problems are not very welcome. I think that we have pockets of kind of politicians across quite a few parties actually who are open to this and who are pushing and lobbying within their own parties. There are lots of different actors within these spaces and some of them are interested in it, and it comes back to mobilising all of us to be louder and to be more connected, because even within kind of the policy environment actually we do have people who are sympathetic, supportive or curious at least about these ideas. It's about whether we can animate and energise those conversations and grow them. We know it makes a difference, we hope it makes a difference, and we carry on doing it because we want to make a difference, right?
Temi, I wanted to ask you about this because you've been working this in a lot, for a long time. Where do you see the good work happening, and what can we scale?
What makes me feel most hopeful is exactly that real change is happening in communities every day. Yes, we're a community of people that have been harmed, that have faced violence, that have come to a lot of threat, and that is not kind of understood in our longings for change and the movements that we are progressing and the solutions that we're putting forward. It is from survivors. We are survivors movement, and I just really wanted to make that clear because it's from our own experiences of being harmed and not having adequate support or response, things that could have prevented further harm, further violence from happening that weren't in place, that drives us and compels us to be, we have to create the alternatives. So things I'm seeing that have made me feel really hopeful. I'm seeing real life response to conflict, to community harms being dealt with. I'm seeing accountability being taken forward by communities to mediate conflicts, to deal with these kind of things. I'm seeing therapeutic support and other healing support. I'm seeing this being done by people that have also themselves been harmed and creating new structures where we can get support for one another. I'm seeing that we're coming together to really imagine what these new systems can look like and sharing those visions. It's not a lack of imagination, ideas or real alternatives is not the problem. It's a lack of the political will, like you said, a lack of resourcing and still a deep investment in the way things are. So if we are really serious about change, our money also has to match the change that we want, and we have to start investing at that level. And the scale is big, but the scale of harm is huge. What's missing from the conversation is how much the current system costs in terms of the harm it creates. If I told you how much it costs to just put a young person in prison, hundreds of thousands, you could pay about 300 grand for one young person for 1 year in an institution like Cookham Wood, for example. Feltham is more than 200,000. These are huge sums. Keeping just an adult in prison costs about 60 grand a year. This is huge sums of money. Trials for these young people in joint enterprise, it's about $1 million per person per year. For the sake of what? For just more punishment and harm. We don't actually have to live like that. So that it's not about a lack of resource. It's not prioritizing where that resource should be spent. And we have solutions. We can do so much with the resource.
Wow, Temi. There's a point that you made in that I don't want people to miss either. It's the fact that imagination and imagining something different has direct positive impacts on young people. And I hate the fact that when we talk about imagination, when people mention this, often it's so undermined. But imagination is what is keeping so many young people safe at the moment?
All of the systems we have today were
imagined.
They didn't exist. They didn't.
I love it.
Somebody imagined it, then they created it. We are living the real in other people's imagination. The future is going to be based on someone's imagination. It's either going to be ours or someone else's. It's either going to be our agenda or someone else's. We're going to live in that future. So I encourage everybody, there's no magic here. Start with a blank piece of paper. Really think, what are the situations you've been in? What are the things how could that have been dealt with? What did you need? What happened and what did you really need? It starts with everyday people being part of that imagining process and coming together to say, here's something we can build. It's going to take everybody. This is not something that any one person can do, by the way, or even one organisation. This has to be across the country. It's real change.
Shabna, to close, what does a system look like that helps young people thrive from a Runnymede Trust perspective?
We are deprived of this kind of ability to imagine ourselves a different society, but social systems are created. The economy is created. We create it, we enact it, we invest in it, and they are entirely within our gift. So this idea that it exists outside of us and it's over there and it's someone else's business and we're completely kind of stripped of our agency and our sense of control or kind of ownership over that. That's a fiction. That is the fiction, right? That's the fiction. And actually, we can imagine something different and we can build something different. And it's been done time and time again by generations, by civilizations. And we are entirely capable of it. So I would 100% echo what Temi said.
I love this. Like, you can just, everything's been imagined and you can build it from imagination. I love that. And I think young people are not the problem. It is the systems that exist around them that are the problem. And I think often us as adults, actually, you know, the ways we perceived young people are a problem. The ways in which we speak to them are a problem. The ways in which we position their realities are a problem. The way we dehumanize them and don't see their emotions is a problem. I think we all collectively, not just the statutory organisations, not just the systems, not just the organisations, but each of us as adults in society have a duty to reposition the ways in which we see young people if we want a better future for them. I just want to thank you so much for joining me today. What a way to wrap up this podcast. I think it's been an amazing conversation, and just thank you both for sitting down with me.
No, thank you.
I just want to give a very special thank you to my guests who joined me today, Temi Mwale and Shabna Begum, and everyone who shared their experiences across the series. I hope it's been enlightening for you as it has been for me. I mean, there's so much food for thought there. And I think, like I said, and like we've wrapped up, we have a duty to make sure that we are supporting young people in all of the ways that have been mentioned by our guests across the series. This has been Unpacked, Young People and Violence, a reduced listening production for the Runnymede Trust.